That picture does not look like me at all, by the way.
Do what?
I don't look like that picture at all anymore.
You don't. I almost thought about asking for another one, but that was the one on your site, so I just grabbed it real quick. This is Tony Vicida. We are live here on Plus One EXP's Roll for Content Actual Play channel, talking about the fact that we do all, in fact, get older, get a little bolder, and get even more handsome as we go. I'm sitting down today with Alan Bahr from Gallant Night Games, asking him questions about game design, the Tiny D6 system, and the Gallantverse, the new Tiny D6 Supers. It's on live right now, along with a little bit of just about what it's like to run an RPG company. If you have any questions that you want to toss in the chat, feel free to. You can find us at Plus One EXP across all social media platforms. We're a weird little brand that multi-classes in tabletop game design, beard, and skincare alchemy, and the Bardic College of Content Creation. But you didn't come here to hear from me. You came here to hear from our guest, Alan Bahr. Alan, why don't you tell people a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure, can do. I'm Alan Bahr, as we've mentioned a few times at this juncture. I run Gallant Night Games, an RPG publishing company. We're most notable for the Tiny D6 line of games, which includes games like Tiny Dungeon, Tiny Frontiers Revised, Tiny Supers, and just released Tiny Cthulhu. I also write for other companies, and Gallant Night Games serves as a publishing house and partner for lots of indie designers looking for somebody to do the back end work for them.
Yeah, you guys put out a prolific amount of content and games every single year, both in print and digitally. It's incredibly impressive for somebody who struggles to get out a game every single year. And so
I don't get to eat or get paid if I don't release products.
That's true. That's true. And I spend a lot of my time doing the other things that allow me to eat and get paid. So that probably makes sense. But no, tell people a little bit about kind of what originally got you into game design. What made you decide, hey, I want to be a now full-time game designer?
That's hard. You know, I don't have some big revelatory moment. I always enjoyed playing role-playing games. We played a lot of role-playing games. I enjoyed homebrewing stuff, and it kind of just snowballed, into one day I got a gig writing for a game, and I liked it. I kept doing it, and then we started making it up. I was like, I think I can do this full time. Let's take the plunge.
That's awesome.
And there's not some revelatory lightning bolt that struck me from upon high and said, you're a game designer now. It just kind of happened.
Thou shalt design. What do you remember kind of like one of the things we'll talk about on stream a lot, especially with designers, is like from the moment you're playing, if you're GMing especially, but at any level of play, you're pretty much hacking and designing also, right? Like you're coming up with ideas, you're collaborating with system. Somebody one day complained that like, why should I pay for an RPG? Like, because RPG designers in their mind don't finish their games, which I'm especially excited to talk to you about, because you're like, one of our previous conversations, you were like, I only design 90% of my game. You've got to do the other 10%. I was originally kind of taken aback, and they're not incorrect in the sense of, yeah, they're giving you a scaffolding, but yeah, it was such an interesting statement where it's like, I really want to push back hard on this person and be like, screw you. But also like, there's a conversation that's really kind of important there, like
I think there is, and I'm excited to have it, and we should have it. So let's do it.
Yeah. So I know one from our last conversation, one of your statements was you design 90% of your games. You kind of leave 10% up to people to figure out. Tell me and tell me why that's a design choice you make, that you kind of leave those open spaces in your games.
Yeah, no, that's I think that's a huge question. And to be clear, before the internet brigade gets me, 90% is just a number I have chosen to illustrate the point. I don't have some secret, like I write 90% of the words I plan and then I cut 10 out. Like I don't write 100% of the game and then just randomly remove 10%.
You send it to the editor and say, cut 10%. I don't care which 10%,
Pick chapters that equal 10%, take them out. Why is there no chapter on healing? I don't know. So to me, role-playing games are, and I believe it was Robin Laws who said something to the effect of, role-playing games are the only creative medium where the consumer is also the author. Right? The person intaking the creative content is also outputting the same creative content in the same event. right? You don't watch a movie and the movie doesn't react to what you're doing,
Right.
right? You're watching the movie. And RPGs are different. And they're one of the few games that are the few genres that are like that. I can't think of another one off the top of my head, but I'm sure there is one. And what that means is every game you play with your group is different than every game I play with my group, even if we play the same game, the same campaign, the same everything, right? It's going to be different. And I think as game designers, it's important to acknowledge that this is twofold. The first is it's a dirty sales tactic, because people who feel invested in your game because they've made it their own will buy more of your game.
Right.
Right. And so that's the dirty sales tactic portion of the equation. But that's not why I do it. It's just a nice perk. It makes it mean more when it's your own thing at the table, right? And that 10% that you have to fill in lets you make the game perfect for your group, right? Think of it as a recipe. I've got a player who likes a little bit of cinnamon. I got a player who likes a little bit of oregano, right? Not normally two complementary flavors you would throw together, but there are places where they work together. And so leaving that 10% out allows the table to add that 10% back in and make it a truly unique creation to themselves. And I think that heightens the immersive, but also emergent nature that all RPGs have, even if they try to bury it in 1,000-page tomes of rules.
Right. No, I love that idea. And I think it's actually an incredibly freeing thing to name. Like, people want to math out and perfect their game and have every player question answered. And I would say the average person sitting down to play your RPG doesn't actually want you to answer all their questions. They just want you to not leave any sort of major questions unanswered.
Right. Well, and that's kind of the trick, right? And that's why you buy a game a game designer makes, is because the game designer hopefully knows what are the 90% of questions they need to answer and what are the 10% they can leave empty. That's their job.
Yeah.
Right. And hopefully a good game designer knows that, both mechanical and narrative questions, right? There are, like, Tiny D6, our flagship rule set, doesn't have rules for falling damage. I don't care about that, right? I don't know, take some damage, whatever. So when people ask me, I always tell them that's not really a thing I'm going to write into the game.
Right.
I don't think it's a statistically significant rule set. I played 20 years of D&D, and I think I rolled for falling damage like 6 times tops, right? It just never comes up.
Right.
You're going to fall enough that you die, or you're going to fall enough it doesn't matter. Those are like the 2 levels of falling.
Yeah. And anything in between, like at your table, like roll some dice, figure it out. It's not, like, it's not the end of the world. Like the GM.
I don't need a formula.
Yeah. If the GM wants you to take some damage when you take that fall, they're going to say, roll a D12, roll a D6, roll a D8, roll 2D20, whatever. Like, and they're going to decide.
Well, and a lot of this, frankly, is a lot of my game design is reaction to experiences I have as a player. So I remember a campaign we were playing that will remain unnamed years ago, probably 15 years ago now. I'm getting old. I never used to be able to say 50 years ago because I was like an infant, and now that's a legit thing I can say. And we were jumping out of a 2nd story inn, trying to escape from some stuff that was happening, right? And we jump out, and I rolled badly, and the GM rolled, and I hear from the GM, the ground has crit. And I remember stopping and going, I'm sorry, what just happened? He's like, the ground has crit. Here's the total damage. I'm like, that kills me. I'm dead from this fall. He's like, that's how it goes. And I was like, that's not how it goes. That's colossally stupid.
Right.
We were playing a fantasy game, and it's just like a story window of an inn in a medieval world. I'm a 6'4" former gladiator. I'm like, I'm not going to die because I jumped out a window. Like, even if it was on cobblestone, I'd be fine, but it's dirt. Like, and I remember thinking, there are rules in games that turn bad more often than not. They create a negative play experience. And so those are the 10% of the rules I try to leave out. What are the rules that, and that's not, and some people like falling damage, and for them that's great, put it in the game, right? For me, that's a negative play experience. Almost every time I encounter falling damage, I never walk away going, oh, that was a great addition to the game. I'm happy there's falling damage here. So to me, that's my job as the game designer, that hopefully, I'd like to think I do pretty well, and to justify the price is my job is to think about that stuff. So when you get to your table, you don't have to, but as a parent, what parts you can make your own easily enough, and then you can change the rest of it too.
Well, let's look at the Tiny D6 system as kind of an example. So let's talk about, for people who aren't familiar with it, tell us kind of about the general framework of the Tiny D6 system and how it works.
Yeah. So Tiny D6 is a minimalist game engine, which means it's designed to run as stripped down and fast as possible. Anything that we felt was not relevant to resolving the things that you're doing is out of the game. So the base mechanic is you roll 2 6-sided dice. If either dice results in a 5 or a 6, you are successful. If you have no 5s or 6s, you're not successful. That's it. That's all it is. You are either successful or you're not. The amount of 5s or 6s doesn't matter. Just you did it or you didn't. If you have advantage, you get to roll 3. If you have disadvantage, you get to roll 1. That's the whole engine. There's no skills. You have traits that tell you what you get advantage on. And that's the concept. All damage is 1 or 2 points of damage, depending on the weapon. That's it. There's no rolling for damage. There's no modifiers. I think there's like one trait, like the Berserker trait says you can do bonus damage if X, Y, or Z. And that's it. Like, when you play the game, we're trying to answer the question. When you play the game, what slows you down? What do you have to look in the rulebook for, right? And things like, what do skills do? What damage does my weapon do? I have to roll damage. My idea is you should roll once and be able to move on from this thing that is happening. Right? I roll once. Did I hit him with my sword? Roll. Done. I did damage. I don't need to roll damage. I don't need to confirm the crit. I don't need to, roll for weapon breakage. I don't need to see what the hit location is.
Right.
All those things are great. And I play games that have all those, and I love them. They're a lot of fun. I'm not knocking those mechanics. That's just our design is a deliberate response to say, what is the stuff we don't think we need when we want to tell stories at the table as a group? We need a rule set to adjudicate the differences, to help us split the hairs that need to be split, right? But we don't need to split every hair. We can just kind of say, no, I think this is good. Let's keep going. What's fun? What's rolling? Let's just keep going. So that's kind of the core ethos of Tiny D6. And we use a bunch of genres. So we do Tiny Dungeon, which is your classic dungeon crawly style fantasy stuff. Tiny Frontiers Revised is our space opera. We have Tiny Wastelands, which is post-apocalyptic. We have Tiny Supers, which is superheroes. We have Tiny Cthulhu, which is cosmic horror. We have a bunch of smaller ones in there. There's like zombies and westerns, and pirates and stuff. And so, and each of these books adds a different subset of rules to the genre. So in Wastelands, there's rules for vehicles and vehicle maintenance, scavenging, and running a settlement, and having to deal with like population and supply and stuff like that. In Tiny Frontiers, there's starship rules. In Tiny Cthulhu, there's shockingly rules for corruption and magic and creepy weird monsters on the edge of space and stuff. Yeah. So, we try to take this toolbox approach and say, what is the minimum we need to play the game, and let the rest get out of the way.
Yeah. Which is interesting because like we've talked a lot about SRDs in the last few weeks, but essentially Tiny D6, like you start with the core, like this minimalist SRD, this minimalist, like here are the essential things you need for this. And then the design process really for y'all has been layering on. Here is what specifically goes in this, rather than a lot of design where it's like we made the genre thing first and then extracted all the essential information out and then are now trying to apply it other places. Y'all really started with this kind of core crystalline idea about what you were trying to do. And then like you said, just getting everything else out of the way.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. I think those are two different but valid approaches to design, right? I think there's a lot of strength to games that go, we're going to start with the genre emulation first and work backwards from there. And Tiny D6, we're kind of doing the opposite. We're going to start with our mechanical basis and build up from there to what are the genre points that require the complexity of additional rules.
Yeah. And like I think I mentioned on stream the other day, like there's something about Tiny D6 that almost like no other system, and they're two very different systems other than the fact that they both use D6, that absolutely reminds me of GURPS when I play. And it's one of the and that's a compliment. Like I want you to understand, like that is GURPS is my heart. Like it's taken I will constantly write reviews for GURPS. And never record them because I'm just not sure exactly what I want to say. But they almost all start with, this is the most biased review I'll ever give, because GURPS is what got me into role playing. So as much as anyone else can hate it, love it, whatever, it is once you're past character creation in GURPS, like the core mechanic is incredibly simple and crystalline, right? Like it's very easy to know. You roll 3d6, you try to roll low or whatever. There are so many small things that y'all do, and I think a big part of it's the generic approach, like the fact that you start with the system itself, and then you do those layering pieces to say, hey, if you want complexity in this era, go this way. Because if you also want vehicle mechanics rules in your Cthulhu setting, you can grab the Tiny D6 Western module, or the Wastelands module, and pull it down and say, all right, here's how this works. If I really want you to have to roll this or figure this out, if your character is a driver and that's what they do, great, here we go. Like, let's have fun. And if you don't, like, that's great. And so,
that's the goal.
Yeah, I think, you know, hearing you articulate that kind of like clarified for me. Okay, this is the thing about Tiny D6 that I really, really love. That is also the same about GURPS, and that's kind of where some of that crossover affinity for me lies.
Ironically, I've never played GURPS.
I believe it. They're two very, like I said, they're two very, very different systems and two very, very different approaches. I mean, GURPS, the attempt was to say, let us answer every single possible question you could ever ask in any way, shape, or form across all of time and space, in one setting, and we'll just release module after module after module until we've gotten there.
Well, and I think it's interesting. I think both approaches are valid, right? That's what I love about game design, and specifically RPG design, so much, because there's a near infinite amount of validity to various approaches.
Yeah.
Right. The only thing that doesn't work is when nobody's having fun playing the game.
Yeah.
As long as people are having fun, arguably it's a success.
100%. And that's, you know, it's one of the big things. Like I'll tell people were like, oh, well, you've never done any Dungeons and Dragons content, right? Because we cover indie games, and that's not because I hate Dungeons and Dragons. Like, I don't play a lot of 5th edition, but I do, and I will if that's what everybody around the table wants to play, because I want to sit around and have a good time. And so if that's what people want to do, I'm fine with that. We'll cover indie third-party stuff, but there's also just a ton of Wizards content out on the internet, and I don't need to be one more person commenting about it. I want to go explore the new space, or the other thing, and that's what we've focused on. There's no reason, like, it's not a slam, it's not a jab, it's not anything else. The game that you love playing is the game you should play. Absolutely. We just think that there are a ton more games out there, and the more we play those, like, every time I play a game, I think about what would I do with this, even in my own table, even in a different setting, even in a different way, like back at my own table. What does it tell me about the way that I want to play games in the future? And what does it clarify for me about just what makes things fun around the table for people? And you get that the more systems you explore and other things like that. So I absolutely love that. So let's talk about Tiny Supers specifically. You guys do have a Kickstarter up right now. We'll get to that in just one second, but it's expanding the world of Tiny D6 Supers. So talk to me about taking that Tiny D6 system and applying it to the Supers genre.
Sure. So the biggest shift, and so it's funny. So we talked about how we take the rule set and we build up, right? Supers is the first time I feel like we didn't build up far enough, actually. Like, I love the game. This is my favorite game I've ever written and made, actually. If I could write superhero RPG content all day long, I'd be the happiest guy in the world. Superheroes and spies. That's my jam. You know, we always get some comments. It seems a little more dungeon crawly than the average superhero RPG. And I always go, yeah, that's probably because we did that build-up thing, right? So there's an inherent risk with that. But you know, but the majority of people like it. So Tiny Supers it's a platinum bestseller in drive-thru. It's an award-winning superhero role-playing game, minimalist. The big thing we do is we take the idea of these traits, what gives you advantage on things, and then we create what are called power traits, which are 3-tiered traits that you can take multiple times to get improved benefits. And so what we can then do is we say, okay, this is super speed tier 1. What does that do? Okay, what does super speed tier 2 do? And so these traits get better the more you take them, and you can mix and match them to create this broad spectrum of superheroes. And we've sort of left traits themeless. So, for example, Blast is just like a ranged attack. That can be I-beams, that could be magic, that could be frost, whatever you wanted. It's your job to kind of take the power and theme it how you want it to feel when you play with it.
Right. Yeah. The classic, tell me what this looks like, right? Like let me know what this looks like for your character at your table as we play, right? Like
and some of those are obvious, right? 2 degrees super speed always kind of looks like super speed.
Mm-hmm.
right? Be it I look like a blur or I leave red and yellow lightning behind me. Super speed is still just kind of super speedy. But some powers, I don't need 1,001 blasts for magic blast and ice blast and fire blast. Like, it's blast, just retheme it. And the GM knows how fire interacts with somebody who's fire resistant. Like, you don't need me to spell out every possible interaction for you.
Yeah. No. And so you said you didn't feel like y'all had taken that far enough. And so what were the areas you really wanted to push further out into?
We, in order to keep it compatible with other Tiny D6 games, I kind of feel, and this goes back and forth, and I think every game designer has this, right? You kind of wonder, did I do this right? And I always wonder if we didn't push the movement system and the range system far enough away from its dungeon crawly roots. You know, because we use this rule called zones in Tiny Supers, and you move between zones, and they're just like discrete chunks of spaces. It's like this room in my house is a zone. The hallway is a zone. So a move action moves me from this zone to the next zone, right? But that can feel, in a superhero game, that can feel kind of dungeon crawly when you start to mix in things like super speed or flight. And it kind of, I don't think it's bad. And, you know, it's a handful of comments, right? Like, but you know how it is as a creative. Those handful of comments are the ones that kind of get in your head and you start to wonder. And so I always kind of look at it and go, did I do enough to answer these questions? And to a degree, I think I did. I mean, it works. It's compatible, which is the goal. We want it to be compatible with other Tiny D6 games, which requires some compromise on a level. All the Tiny D6 games have a compromise somewhere in the engine in order to be compatible. You just can't do it without that.
Yeah.
Right. I think Supers just shows it a little more because the genre is so different.
No, I imagine. And you know, it's one of those things though. I also think there's like, hey, I feel these limitations, but then you also get those fun surprises as you go through. Like sometimes it is the peanut butter and chocolate reality of, oh, if we hadn't been trying to do some of the stuff that requires a little genre mashing, we would never have discovered this unique facet to the way this feels. And if you're trying to introduce somebody to a Supers game for the first time and all they've ever done is dungeon crawl, using something like Tiny D6 Supers where it's like, yeah, we're going to take a step this direction, but like if all you've ever done is dungeon crawl, it's going to be there's going to be some familiar touch points that you're going to be able to like feel connected to as we move in this direction. So I always like to think about like, what are the spectrum, like what games lead to other games, what games, once you've played them, make you more comfortable trying the next step. And I think that's really important, even as like we've talked a lot about lately, like what are the board games that help lean further and further towards RPGs. So for people who like, I'm not creative, I could never play an RPG, realize like you can be as creative or non-creative as you want, and you might not enjoy RPGs. That's fine. Like, but give it a try. And what are those games we play that kind of introduce you slowly to how creative or narrative you need to be? Because not every RPG requires that you be massively creative. We talked with one of my friends. I was like, you know, there are games I could play where I could give you a hand of cards that have each of your abilities on them and let you play them like it was a hand management game. And everybody else could be playing off their character sheet, but you would have the exact same experience because once you've used it, it's going to go in your discard until you've done something that's going to bring it back into your hand. And you would feel totally comfortable with that. You just don't think you are because you've never played an RPG before, you know? And so, like I said, I think there's a lot about thinking about what are those games that help lead people from one way to another. Now you are currently in the process of pushing the Tiny D6 Super system, if not further, bigger and wider. You guys have the Gallantverse campaign up live right now. So tell us about Gallantverse and what's going on there.
Sure. So the campaign represents our first significant and material expansion to a Tiny D6 line. Normally, our genre books stand alone. This is the first time we've done a supplement that isn't basically a campaign setting. It is a campaign setting because the Gallantverse is in Tiny Supers, which, let me back up here. I'm not saying this correctly. So Tiny Supers introduced the first campaign setting to Tiny D6. Previously, our books had no campaign settings. And that was the Gallantverse. That was our campaign setting. And so this expands the Gallantverse. It also adds new mechanics to Tiny Supers, which previously we haven't done large book supplementary content. We do our genre, we feature stuff in our Tiny Zine, our monthly e-magazine. Occasionally, like we did Destiny of Tides, which was a campaign setting for Tiny Dungeon. But this represents the first significant mechanical and setting expansion in one big go in a large sense.
Yeah.
Really a product line.
Yeah. No, I think that's awesome. As a designer, like what were some of the challenges you were approaching that conversation? I imagine there's probably some internal, like, do we do this or not? But what were some of the challenges from a managerial standpoint that you guys confronted with that?
Yeah. So I mean, the first one is there a market for more content, right? That's kind of the first. Can we make money making this? Otherwise, how am I going to eat tomorrow? Is the first question. Secondly, is do we have something interesting to say, right? I don't feel like anybody needs me to regurgitate Golden Age superheroes punch Nazis again in a different rule set to them. There's plenty of games that do that. There's plenty of settings that do that. I think most superhero GMs could leverage that idea off the top of their head without my help. Right. So do I have something, and do we have something different to say about what's happening here? And if I can answer all those questions, yes. The answer is yes. Then we do the book. And so in this case, Tiny Supers, after Tiny Super has been out, no matter how much we play test, and we have a really robust playtest team who's fantastic, and they do good work. No matter how much you play test, there's always gaps. And so this sort of addresses some of the gaps in that exist in Tiny Supers to emulate the superhero genre. We introduced 3 new archetypes, which are types of heroes. We've got the big hulking bruiser called the Brute. He's just a pile of hit points, right? Big, tough, old Brute. We've got a trickster archetype. We've got the stalker archetype. And so these were previously archetypes that didn't exist. And then we also introduced 11 new powers, which is a 50% increase in the amount of powers. There's only 22 powers in the core book, and we've added 11 more. So, and each power has 3 traits. So really there's 66 levels of powers, and we've just added 33 more. And these power traits, they address gaps where I didn't feel, maybe I felt like, well, you can emulate this one close enough with X, right? And as more and more people play it, we keep hearing it, and we go, okay, maybe what's worked for us and our playtest teams isn't working here. And that stuff you can't find out till the game is in wide release to a degree. And so there's some of that. There's some new powers that we looked as we expanded the setting. We went, oh, we need a power that does this. Nobody's brought it up, but we hadn't thought about it, or we didn't feel it was significant. Weird ones. In this one, there's a power for prehensile limbs, which I would not have written ever. But there was a couple months where every couple days somebody was asking me, is there a way to do prehensile grappling hair or tails? And I was always like, I mean, what do you want to do? I wanted to entangle people, use the snare power, right? That's you're right there. And then, but it wasn't, people were coming, well, that's not what I want. And so so we added a prehensile limb power, and I talked to some of these people and said, what does it not do that you want it to do?
Right.
And that's the question we tried to answer. And then we expanded the setting. So the Gallantverse is our world in the near future. It's kind of a near future science fiction vibe. Similar to the kind of the early MCU with the techno Stark heroes and kind of stuff like that, right? There's still magic, there's still mutants, but it's mostly science-based stuff. And we try to say, and when we did Tiny Supers, we focused on our city, which is Century City, Centry. But then we also said, okay, that's great, but if you watch a lot of DC or read a lot of Marvel or whatever, you always feel like it's very East Coast centric, right? Metropolis is New York, Gotham is New York, whatever, right? These are, and in literally in the case of Marvel, Spider-Man's in New York.
Right.
So I was like, I didn't grow up in the coast. I grew up in the Midwest. I was like, what about the rest of the world? I get the population centers are going to have more heroes, and that's how math works. And so in Tiny Supers, we traveled around. We said, okay, we start with Century City, which is our coastal city in the U.S. But then we go to, what are the heroes in the Pacific Rim? What do the heroes in Africa look like? How are they different? What sets these places apart? And so we added these new locales and regions, focus on our world, and then the classic superhero stuff. What is it like in space? And the Gallantverse campaign expands that. So we have text about South America, about parts of Europe, and Atlantis. Cool. So we're kind of saying, our goal is to create, through all the books, a gazetteer that says, here is why heroes exist here, and here is how they are different or unique or special or why they need heroes.
Yeah. No, I love that, because I think, especially as you look at, like, I'm a huge fan of the street level super, right? Which means you're dealing with the neighborhood, and then in big battles, the city. But the reality is, a lot of people start out at full, like, 4-color, and then it's like,
Right.
okay, well, if Batman and Superman are so close to each other, and if Gotham and Metropolis, like, why does Superman not just protecting, like, you end up with these weird questions of, like, Superman could totally cover both of these cities, but for some reason we have another superhero also too, and this guy just stays out of it unless we have a crossover event for plot reasons. And so, like, having those kind of move around, answering those questions, talking about the unique is something that actually I don't know that I've seen a lot of super settings out there do. And if they do, it's very like generic. Oh, we tossed in a couple from this culture or that culture, but we haven't asked the question, what are they doing there and how is that distinct for their needs? I love that kind of gazetteer like approach. Absolutely. No, I think that's phenomenal. I also love that, like, you're getting a chance to kind of take all the feedback you've gotten from play, which I think is the best part about doing, whether you're doing a second edition, whether you're doing, an expansion, whether you're doing genre play, being able to say, hey, what are the other pieces that we wanted to do in this one, or that people have asked for over and over again, and now we can put that into play and kind of expand that, especially for a system that, like you said, you would have wanted to push a little bit further in some different ways initially anyways. The ability to actually have the opportunity to flex that muscle is very cool and very, very exciting. So yeah,
it's fun. I love this book. It's one of my favorite books we've produced.
Yeah. Now I asked a question on stream the other day and hurt your feelings, and so now I have you on here, so you get to defend. You get to. I don't think I actually heard, you said I'm hurt, but I don't think you were being serious in the chat. I asked a question, and since I have you here, I'm gonna let you talk about it a little bit, because you said it was hard to explain. I always tell people whenever we're doing backer quest or other stuff on stream, like, the number one thing I look for is flavor, and then basically focus. Like, tell me about how this game feels, and tell me about, like, what specifically I'm getting in this. And lots of times when people do pledge levels or other stuff like that, they'll be buried way further down. Y'all started with pledge levels at the top of your Kickstarter campaign. It was just a question. But I also respect, like, again, you're somebody who, you have 22 projects on Kickstarter. I'm not sure if they've all been successful, but I know the vast majority of them have been. You know what you're doing. So this wasn't an unintentional choice. So I want to know about the choice to start off at the top of your campaign with the pledge levels.
Well, this might be the first time somebody's told me they think I know what I'm doing. So thanks for that. That was really nice to hear. I don't feel that way. Honestly, there's no good data around this, and I was like, well, prior to being a full-time game designer, my job was in data analytics and project management, and so I have a very strong analytical background, because that was a job for over a decade. And so when I don't have data, I go and make data.
Yeah.
And I don't have data about if this works. So I was like, well, we gotta get data, so let's just do it.
I love it. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. It's like, are Tuesdays the best day to launch on Kickstarter because they're the best day to launch on Kickstarter, or because data said Tuesdays were the best day, so then more people did it, so then more.
It used to be data said Tuesdays were the best day. Now it's just everybody does it.
Yeah, now just everybody does it, and so,
we
like,
actually don't launch on Tuesdays.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, we launched our last one on a Monday. We did fine. Like, a lot of it's finessing for, when do I want to start and end? How long is my? I mean, there's tons of other factors that are far more important.
Monday, Wednesday, or Thursdays. I don't do Fridays or the weekends.
Yeah, and I would agree. Like, you want to give people that as many opportunities, and you want to look at when your 48-hour reminder emails are going to go out.
I actually base it on paycheck cycles.
Yeah,
I want to make sure there are 2 paycheck cycles inside my window of funding.
100%. Yeah,
and so that's actually my benchmark.
Which is also really interesting when people are like, well, I get paid this Friday for this Kickstarter that's not going to clear for 3 weeks, but that's when I'm going to back, because that's when I know I have money, and that's all fine. Like, that's a backer mentality, and I appreciate that. Yeah. So far, I know the campaign's got 3 days left. You guys have already funded. What is the data telling you so far? I know it's early, but
well, so it's interesting. So part of it is supplements don't ever do as well as core books, right? That's just because you got to have a core book to buy a supplement, and not everybody who has a core book buys a supplement. So that's hard to say. This is a relatively high funding goal. The funding goal is actually closer to what we funded Tiny Supers at, because
Okay.
print runs are expensive and they've only got more expensive. And this is only hardcover. Tiny Supers had a goal of 10,000. This was 7,000. So
yeah.
So there's a lot of variables that aren't just about that graphic at the start.
Right.
I don't think the graphics hurt us. I don't think I'd put it at the start either, though. I don't feel like it's giving us any bonus return.
Yeah. No, like I said, it was just such an interesting thing, because if it was somebody who it was the first time, I would have been like, oh, they just thought this was the best place to put this, or they didn't know, or they have a reason for it, but I'm just never going to know. Again, somebody who I know, looking at your other campaigns, it was an out of the box choice even for y'all. It was literally just a question that I had, because I was like, I love when people try new things for their Kickstarter campaigns. Like, doing the same thing over and over again doesn't move the needle for me as a backer either.
The intent was, by showing this quickly and early, we could entice people to, because it's almost as long as a sidebar to a degree, right? Like, you could look at this and go, what do I want? Boom, done. Then read the campaign.
Right.
That's what a lot of people do, right? When I back a campaign, I don't read the whole page. I look at the pledge levels, I look at what I want, I click it, and then I go read the whole page.
Right. Yeah. That's me. Yeah, that's 100% me. Like, I whether people graphically represent their pledge goals or not, like, I'll look at the first 3 or 4 paragraphs, then hop over to like what are the backer levels? Cool. Then I'm gonna I'll click which one I'm gonna click, and then I'll go back.
I'm usually in after the elevator pinch, or I'm not. Right. That's it. So for me, this was an attempt to say, if I was gonna do it again, I would have put it below our elevator pitch. This many graphics in a row, I think, was a mistake. I don't think it's hurting us per se. But it might be. But I would have put it underneath below the pitch. Yeah. So,
well, and I think the major advantage is a supplement is a good place to experiment with that, because you have the built-in audience who's already coming to the page, who's already bought into the elevator pitch, who's already looking for this. We are going to go in at the $50 level, because I don't have a print copy yet, and so I don't think I hit back the other day after talking about it online. So. That's one more. If you're out there right now watching, I would encourage y'all to go watch it. Hold on. I meant to do this at the very beginning and absolutely forgot to. I'm going to drop the link in the Twitch stream if you're watching right now. If not, it's not hard to find. You just have to search Gallant Night Games or Gallantverse campaign on Kickstarter, or really, if you do it on the internet right now and search Kickstarter also, it'll come up. And so... Now, we mentioned already you're full-time. You guys have a Patreon also, too. Give me just 1 second. I'm going to pull that up so that people can see it. But tell people, if they check out your Patreon for your company, not only do they help support you and making sure that you can do that thing that you like to do called eating, but they help support the company, and they're probably going to get some stuff also. So tell me a little bit more about why people might be interested in the Patreon for Gallant Night Games.
So when I started Gallant Night Games back in 2016, one of the things I said from the start was that we were going to pay an above average and sustainable wage to our creatives. So, for example, our minimum word rate per word is 10 cents. And we've never paid less than that on a project. Mm-hmm. And the industry average is anywhere from 4 to 6.
Yeah.
And so I actually... I'm trying to think I don't talk about this a lot, because I tend to, my finances aren't anything I want to talk about on the internet usually. It's I could double the amount of money I make if I cut rates to 5 cents a word, which is an industry average, right? I'm paying double that. And rates have gone up over the last year, which is great. But whenever we run a project, at minimum, people are getting paid 10 cents a word. Right? We pay our layout designers their rates. They get to set their rates. Our artists set their rates. And obviously we work with them to say, there's a point where I have to say, yeah, if you set your rate this high, I just can't pay you. Like, right? Yeah. Because I got to stay in business too. But we always work to find as much as possible where they win. Mm-hmm. And the Patreon is a great way to provide stability to me as a full-time creative running this company, while ensuring that money goes to paying creatives those livable rates. Like, we didn't have to cut our pay during COVID. In fact, we increased our monthly hires of freelancers during 2020 and 2021 so far.
That's awesome.
In order to, we didn't have to cut anybody's pay. We didn't have to cancel any projects. We've got a really great fan base that has been really supportive of Gallant Night Games. But It's hard, right? And part of that is this commitment to an ethical pay rate means we have to really stick to our budgets. And the Patreon is a great way for us to have capital to provide security and experiment and try new things and grow the company. Like, for example, due to the Patreon on this Kickstarter, it's the first time we're able to offer EU and UK friendly fulfillment.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's a direct benefit of the standard support of the Patreon. Yeah. We can afford to take a risk and try this. And so what Patreons get is they get a monthly e-zine focused usually around Tiny D6, but we also roll in support for our other games or some of our partner games. They get access to interviews I do with colleagues and friends in the game industry. They get previews of our upcoming live stream. We're about to launch a new live stream for Tiny Cthulhu. It'll be our first GKG live stream actual play. And so they've got some bonus stuff for that. They get anywhere from last year, they got 6 full RPGs free. I just gave everybody.
That's awesome.
They get at least something in print twice a year. They get access to drafts, previews. I mean, I did the list at the end of last year. It was, I don't even know.
A lot of stuff.
it was 12 tiny zines. It was like 8 adventures, 8 full RPG game drafts, and plus, I think they got 4 full laid out games, give or take.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So, I try to give bang for your buck, because I know gaming on a budget is hard, and if you're going to give me some of your budget, I'm going to make sure you get more than your budget's worth.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think that's one of the most important parts is people starting to understand it is a financial conversation, obviously, but the financial conversation, I think, for the people who I really always want to highlight, like usually, like I don't ever always ask everybody like, what's your Patreon? It's when I know people are doing good for the industry. That's when it becomes important for me to say, hey, what are other ways you can support this? That's, you, Chris Bissett, there's a number of other people out there, James D'Amato with the micro RPG guidebook, like people who are making intentional choices to say, we want to pay above what the industry expectations are. We want to take care of people. We want to support the creators. And we're seeing that decision get made more and more and more, as well as authors starting to realize like, look, charging more for my book is not doing anyone a disservice. It's making sure that I can pay myself and other people well for making that content. And that's what keeps me being able to make content. And so those things are incredibly important. So if you're somebody out there who has a couple extra bucks, who wants to support great things happening in the industry, who loves great game content, who's interested in the Tiny D6 system, like I would absolutely check out the Gallant Knight Patreon, as well as their other games. You can just go buy games from them also too if you want to. That's another great way to support people. But Tiny D6 is up right now. There's a link if you're watching on Twitch. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'll drop a link in the description shortly, or we tweeted it out earlier today over on Plus One EXP. Alan, is there anything else you want people to know before we go? Any deep dark secrets? Any major reveals you want to let out right now? We're here for you.
Deep dark secrets and major reveals. I don't like bacon. Am I allowed to say that on the internet?
Ooh.
Thing
at all. I have a kid who's like anti-bacon by itself but pro-bacon on things.
I mean, I'll eat it if you put it on a burger or pizza or something, but right. I would have never asked for it.
Interesting.
I prefer breakfast sausage. Like if you're gonna give me a breakfast meat, like give me ham or breakfast sausage. That's where I stand. I don't get the internet's love of bacon. It confuses me.
Yeah.
I've never had bacon. I don't know.
Michael Harmon is a big GKG Patreon. Sapandi says he highly recommends it. Michael's been hanging out with us the entire time. If anybody else has any questions they want to ask, let us know. Otherwise, we're going to sign off in just 1 second. But I want to encourage people to go check out the work that they're doing, whether that's through the website, whether that's the Kickstarter campaign right now, because it is in the middle, it's going into its last 3 hours or 3 hours. It's going into its last 3 days. But if 3 hours makes you hurry over there and back it faster, then absolutely just think of it as 3 hours, but it's got a couple more days left on it. In reality, whatever internal time clocks you need to set for yourself. We had Alan run Morkborg for us. I'm hoping we can get him back on sometime in the future. Some other games for us.
That was an experience, wasn't it?
So if you want to see a similar conversation, but with me with no shirt on, you can go watch our Morkborg stream. Whether that's an incentive or not, that's up to you. But
maybe we should just stay here. I think it's safer.
Alan, what's the best place for people to find you online?
Yeah. So interact with me personally. My personal Twitter is @AlanBahr. Our company Twitter is @GallantKGames. Our website's www.gallantnightgames.com. Our Facebook is facebook.com/GallantNightGames. Our Patreon is patreon.com/GallantNightGames. I think that covers the bulk of it. There's more, but it's not hard to find.
Type in
You just-
Gallant Night Games wherever you're at on the internet. Just type it in. And if it's not there, then maybe soon, one day.
We have a Discord. You can get to our. We have a pretty hopping Discord actually. It's got 700 people in it. Like it's
Awesome.
pretty. You can join that from the Kickstarter page. There's a Discord and a Facebook fan group and stuff. So I'm in all those places. I try to be interactive. I try to hang out and chat and have a good time. I'm a fan of games. I love games. I have so many games.
I know. So my name is Tony Vicinda. You can find me at Tony Vicinda online. You can find us at +1EXP across the internet. Not quite as many places as you can find Gallant Night Games, but a good number of them. We're a weird little brand that multi-classes and tabletop game design, beard and skincare alchemy, and the Bardic College of Content Creation. On Prestige Class, we sit down with designers to talk about the games that they make and the lessons that we can learn from the work that they do. We've been sitting down today with Bahr of Gallant Night Games talking about the Tiny D6 system and the current Gallantverse Kickstarter. But until next time, this has been Prestige Class with Bahr, and class is dismissed.